A bit about me. Rajesh Muthusamy, as introduced by David, and working as an engineering manager in Cognizant. So yes, let's straightly go into the topic. Why would need the OAuth 2.0 and OIDC in place? We have a good old password journey, isn't it? So what is the problem with that? So is there should be any the there should be any important reason behind that, isn't it? So the reason is, if you use the password, for example, in any every one of us might have come across in our journey sometime, especially if you're a developer for last 10 years, then you will definitely would have used password based sessions. What happens is, so once we authenticate a user, we'll create a session, and that session is going to be sticky session, and we'll store the sessions in server, and that sessions will be acting as a tunnel for serving further request. So that will be great approach for good old three-tier architecture, isn't it? So we have front tier, we have a backend, which means a business logic, and then finally database. One database, one backend application server, and one front end server. So this would not be a very difficult one, and it's not very complex. We can handle that, and the sessions, even though it's a session based thing, is overhead, but this is handleable. Nowadays, what is different is we are in the world of microservice. We are in the world of API. Now we are not uh, starting our development from the scratch. We are not writing the code. Now the approach is using a scaffold approach to collect and compose different set of ready-made code and building our own thing. For example, the startup, they are not going to reinvent the AI by themselves. They probably use OpenAI API, isn't it? They will use it, and for that, they if OpenAI relies on a password, how many password they'll have to generate for their customers, for paid customers, and how this is going to be kept secure. So the answer is in terms of OAuth 2.0 and OIDC. So little bit of authentication and authorization here. I'm sure you guys definitely know these terms, but we are touching the topic. Let's discuss that in case anyone having uh, ambiguity between authentication and authorization, because it's easier to get confused with the term. Authentication is a first step. So when a user supply something, and they are saying, for example, I'm saying my name, I'll have to verify who I am, and that is the gateway. It will verify that whether it's you. That is what it is going to do. With a kind of that could be a password based validation, and it could be a certificate based validation. That is mostly a password based validation. As you see in a Gmail login, we are using the password. And authorization, within the Gmail, what I can access, all those things, it is it's segregated with the authorization. So if I own the login ID and I have all the access to my mailbox, this is where the OAuth 2.0 and OIDC comes in place. For example, I have to use a different service. I will authorize that service. For example, that service composes a document for me. For example, we touched upon the topic AI, right? So I am enabling OpenAI to write on behalf of me in the document, Google plain document. And what happens is the OpenAI will request a scope for that, and then if I approve, that particular document is allocated for them because they are not owner. So that is segregation here. And there could be a question might have raised because we spoke about password here for authentication. What is the point of having OAuth 2.0 and OIDC? We were talking about password is a problem, and why a password again? If this is a one time, this is not going to be um, happening again and again. It's gonna stick one time authentication within a big portal, and that portal is capable of opening the door for multiple portal. That we will talk in a bit. That is a very important feature of the OAuth 2.0 and OIDC. It will enable SSO. Not later, let's discuss now. So for example, you might have, definitely we are all working in organization, you might have come across the Microsoft based login, isn't it? So once you log in to your portal, your company portal, the company portal do not have their own login, so they trust the Microsoft Office 365 login. They reuse for their all portal. So look at that. So if they have to rely on the password for each and every app, in my org there is a portal which has hundreds of application. Look at that, for payslip, for timesheet, for everything I have to enter a password. I'll have to keep a notepad which is comprising hundreds of password, which is not only secure, which is a cumbersome. So that pain point is addressed by the OAuth 2.0 and OIDC. So what it does is it generates a token and keep it alive and refresh it if the organization allows it. Otherwise, it just pushes you for a new prompt. And in a nutshell, once it is done, it is universal to the entire portal, not one. So that is the beauty of it. We'll talk some of the difficulty we are all facing in Microsoft. That is coming later when it is a time we talk about specific terms. We'll discuss about that. So as I called earlier, the OAuth 2.0 focus on what resources an user can access. So you logged in, what you can access. So that is what OAuth 2.0 talks about. OpenID is all about authentication, and OpenID also contains OAuth 2. So that is how OpenID comes into the place. We had OAuth 2.0 some time back. OIDC is a new term. Why we have is because OAuth is not meant for authentication. It is meant for authorization, which is resource allocation based on scopes, roles, permissions. It's all about uh, the policy level control. And some of the developers were using that for authentication, which is a kind of misuse, and it would open the door for hackers also. And that is why, hence, there is a standardized way of introducing the authentication also comes in. That is called OpenID. So OpenID, when you implement OpenID, which means that you are implementing both world of OpenID and OAuth 2, which means you will have two kind of token. One is for authentication, one is for authorization. So we touched upon this topic, right? Sometime back. OIDC simplifies a login across multiple sites. What it means is when you log into a main site, that is capable of log you in to all other sites. How that is happen? That is not done by the portal itself. There is a authentication server sits centrally that serves the main portal, that serves the secondary portal, everything. Once you generate, it will be there, and the authorization server sees, hey, this user has a valid token. No need to push him for a new token. So hence, you will not be prompted for the new login. So we talked about that. So this was the example we touched upon. Consider you have an Excel sheet, and you are allowing an access to an external client based on the scope they have. I create edit rights. If you only give edit rights, they will be only editing that, they can't delete. So those are the scope that you can provide. Where that scope comes from, that uh, anyone who implements needs to give the scope. For example, in this case, Google have certain level of granularity. They will allow us to provide the permissions based on their scope. Scope given nothing but a string, which is a kind of a JSON file, and which instructs these are the scopes. And if there is a scope, but there is a the existence of scope, what has to be done for every functionality inside a code snippet, they will have for this scope what has to be done for, or otherwise to perform this action, what are the scopes required. In terms of .NET, it says requires. Within that, you will need to supply the scope nothing but a dictionary, and it has a bunch of scopes. If that is supplied through your authorization, then you'll be opening the world. So let's talk about a bit more about what is happening in the OAuth 2.0 world, considering that there is a bulk messenger app. It is a client. So when I say client, there could be an ambiguity to think about a browser, think about something else. So I'll clarify this. Bulk messenger means, for example, it could be a web now, it could be web, or it could be a desktop application, both. But it is not a browser itself. It is a specific client which has registered to a provider, identity provider. For example, you have come across sites which just say gives a login for Gmail based login, Facebook based login, GitHub based login, but not all of the site provides all of them. So what is the reason is, a site provides um, Gmail as a login mechanism, means they have registered themselves to Google as a client, and hence they know that they can talk to Google on behalf of you and ask for what they need. That is the term for client. And when you do some action and you use the bulk messenger in this example, and it says uh, you need access to your contacts to send a message, then you will say okay. Then what happens is, it will supply the client ID and redirect URI, resource response type, and scope. So what is client ID is a registration ID. It needs to be registered with the provider, hence they can talk. Otherwise the authorization server don't know about that. Redirect URI, what happens, for example, it authorizes it where I can talk back. So that is called redirect URI. These are the secure way of communicating. Otherwise, it has to go through the browser URL, and that is insecure. That is also part of a flow, OAuth flow called implicit flow, where the redirection happened in browser. That is one reason that OAuth 2.0 introduced. And specifically, we are talking about auth code, which is secure and most widely used. That is response type auth code, and some scopes. In this case, access contacts. So when the client presents this is what I need, it requires a login from us, from the resource owner, the user. It will talk, hey, the client supplied the client ID and whatever it required, but I need to identify you before I'm giving permission. So first you identify yourself, who say you are. Then you supply your a password and everything. Then consider this is a bidirectional. It just says one directional, and after that you have provided your credential. Then it presents your presents for concern, as we were speaking before, right? So it will ask for, hey, this client is trying to access the Excel sheet for writing and reading purpose, or in this case, this person is trying to collect your contacts. Is that okay? They want everything. They want to retrieve every contact of yours. And if we say yes, then it will validate further. Then it will provide authorization code. This is a very temporary code. This is intermediate code, I would say. And then this authorization code will be used by the client again. So client has taken the first step. Here client is going to take a second step, which is again it will supply client ID, client secret, and this time, as you see, it has a secret also, and then authorization code. The ask is for access token. So again, the authorization server will validate and provide the access token. The access token gonna stay for roughly, based on your configuration, maybe it is staying for a minute or so. Some of them could extend. So that is ensuring that this is as you see, these are all short-lived tokens. Nowhere this is stored one just in password journeys, right? So this is how the security is ensured. You might have got a question that we were talking about access token is temporary, authorization is temporary. How on earth is possible to keep everything in line and SSO is possible? That is possible because we have a refresh token. You might have come across a scenario. For example, you logged into Gmail quite a while back, and you keep your system open. You lock your system, sleep, and next day you come, the mail still works. You don't prompted with the login. How it happens is it has a refresh token uh, inside of it. So when the authorization server generates access token, it will also generates refresh token. What happens is when access token expires, the client supplies the refresh token and asks for the current one. So that is how it's happening. That is also brings me into an experience that one of person who is holding a CEO position in LinkedIn, who expressed his dissatisfaction about Microsoft logins. So we all come across, right? Microsoft, no matter whether I have logged in today also freshly, it will just throws out. After some time, it will prompt again. That is because Microsoft rejects to use a refresh token for security reason. Maybe they are afraid of the hacking. That is the reason why Microsoft continuously prompting for it. I think if I have logged in the morning, at least it will ask once about once the username and password again, and I have to supply my authenticator token, everything. Authenticator is again another app. The application based code will provide that you might have used. So that is the Microsoft story, because it's dealing with the enterprise. It has to be over conscious about the security measures, regardless of something like Gmail, because we own it, we take a risk, so they refresh it. Yeah, we spoke about OAuth now. So what is OIDC? As we spoke about, it's adding an additional layer on top of OAuth 2.0. OAuth 2.0 is managing the resources based on the permissions we are providing, and it is doing that very nicely, but it is not capable of authenticating. So without entering a site, OAuth is not useful. So that is where the OIDC comes in. The OIDC provides a similar secured way of approach. So just like OAuth 2.0 for authentication. So you will supply your credential, then it will authenticate you, and when authenticates it, it will generate an authentication token and authorization token. So we'll talk more about that. So authentication token keeps you inside, saying that you are allowed to stay in, and authorization token will say where all you can go. Uh, yeah, like we touched upon, this is really useful in SSO implementation, where there are lots of sites hosted within a major organization, and it can be used across multiple portals. You might have come across this, so I am very sure. Also, the login process is simplified. As I recalled, the password is eliminated, if not fully, not again and again, and not multiple time within hundreds of sites within your main site. You will need to log in once, then it's all done. Yeah, again, so we will talk the same example as OAuth 2.0. So here, as you see, there is a difference here. It has a scope OpenID along with other scopes. So usually what the other scopes would be is user and profile is what the OAuth mainly have. If you come across this OpenID term, in any of your requests, if you inspect in a Chrome browser, you would see if you come across this term, which means that the site is using OpenID. I will tell you an example, an interesting example. Let's talk about that bit later. Same thing. The authorization authenticates the user, and it it provides the permissions based on the authentication. It has access token, ID token, and optionally refresh token, as you've seen. So here we will need to spend some time here. Access token is from OAuth 2.0. ID token is from OIDC. Why ID token required is because we need to prove that this user is permitted to stay inside the site. That is where the ID token required. Access token, as you see earlier, the access token is from OAuth 2.0. It is required because the access token also has the token is nothing but a random text which can be decoded with jwt.io, which will, when you decode, it will talk about what it has. That includes the scopes as well. That scope is required to access a certain resource. um, okay, sixth step is access token, ID token, and refresh token. Then client sends a further request with these tokens and access the server. The resource server will respond whenever it has the access token. So before jumping into further concepts, we'll have to differentiate what is exactly different in between OpenID and OAuth. So, as we discussed earlier, in the final exchange, if a client has both access token and ID token, it is OIDC. Otherwise, if it has only access token, it is OAuth. It is OAuth 2.0. So repeat again in case anyone has disturbed. So access token, if we have only access token based on our interaction, it is only OAuth 2.0. If we have access token and ID token, which means that we are implementing OIDC. So how medium.com authenticates and authorizes its content using a Gmail login. As you see, the medium uses OpenID for its authentication. I supplied my email ID to access medium. Some of you might have know the fact that medium is also having a paywall. I'm a paid user, so I would have article access which are only accessible for the paid users. That is why they have to use this OIDC. Otherwise, there is not much thing to use as such thing. So they authenticate and they also have OAuth 2.0. That is where the segregation required. Uh, after supplying the credential in the network, if we analyze the payload says that the client ID is this. So this client ID is nothing but the medium.com, and where it is supplying the client ID to Google, because I am supplying the Google ID, and nonce is some secure term to avoid any hacking, because it is coming from this session, and this random text is identity for that particular thing. Otherwise, this client ID can be spoofed, and there could be an hacking. That is why it is there. So what happens is, once Google is happy with the login, and if I grant the permission where the Google needs to talk, so Medium has given a callback URL, which is termed as a redirect URI. These are the standard terms should be used, because it is a standard mentioned by the OIDC as a protocol here. So the exact term should be used, otherwise this will not be recognized. So after mentioning that, uh, as you look at the call, it's saying that medium.com/m/callback/Google. Because why /Google? Because Medium also has login for maybe Microsoft. I could not recollect. Maybe the Facebook, and definitely for GitHub, right? So they have to remember to where the call made, and so they can act accordingly. And the response type is ID token and token. If you see a plain term called token, it is just access token, OAuth 2.0, and ID token is a OIDC token. So both represent that the user currently logged in is permitted to log in also, and there is a rights based access for this token, for particular token, what access can be given, all those things. So beyond this medium have some mechanism with their self. So they unpack the profile, they unpack the email, and they would have their own scope. uh, yeah. So they have their own the mechanism. For example, my email ID, as I said, I could be a free user, I could be a paid user. So they will do their logic on based on the scope. The scope is, as you see, it's a clear text. It does nothing by itself. It is a very organized way of supplying the system the information it requires to know. As soon as it's seen some scopes like this, the system inside needs to have a code block that will decode what requires. For example, for a paid user, they should have some call. It talks about required scope email, and there could be uh, based on the profile they will add something else as well, because email is common, right? Or they have their own header to add on top of that, and they will implement it. So to the question on the chat window, this is how the payload will look like. This payload talks about what algorithm used and what kind of token it is. This is a JOT token, something a JWT, and fancy calling as a JOT. And it has a payload. This is nothing but subject name. Subject means user. Mm, that's you in most of the case. And IAT means issued at. It could be the date, time, and some timestamp. This payload also should have the scopes. As we saw in previous slide, the scope, as you see here, the payload should have access type, all those things within the token. So this is the structure how that will look like, and there could be an algorithm through which it is signed. The header talks about, as we called out, it talks about the algorithm used and what type of token it is. The payload would have the claims and scopes as well. Based on the scopes, you will act upon the signature finally. That is done by the signing authority, CA, general signing, like public key, private key signing. So I think, yeah, with that note, we will go for a demo, then we can come back, because it's more of a wordy thing now. Well, let's see some demo here. Okay, this is Okta. Is thanks to Okta that they have given a playground where you can play around and see what it is, and see multiple flows. For example, we had discussed about the authorization code flow, right? We had spoke about already implicit flow also, right? This implicit flow just gives the token inside the browser. That's very insecure, hence we'll not be talking about that, and it's not much used, widely used. The widely used one is authorization code, and some very advanced implementation, pixie, this is called the fancy term for supplying the certificate. Instead of the secret, you will supply the certificate. And also OpenID Connect. We will talk predominantly about these two things. Firstly, I will launch this. So consider that this is authorization server. This could be anything. In this case, it is Okta server, Auth, and it could be a Microsoft server, anything else. And the client could be your organization, which request for the code. For in my example, as I when I log in, for example, I would request to Microsoft.com, then authorize what I need. I need a code, and what is my client ID? My company would supply their client ID, and the redirection URI could be their URL. For this example, let's not go everything there, but we'll scope this to here. For example, this is authorization server from Okta, and what they are saying is, I want authorization, and in terms of code, which is nothing but authorization code, and this is my ID. Within Okta, there's a simple client which is hosted, and that could tell his ID, client ID. If anyone have this confusion on client ID, let's talk about that. I'm happy to chat after this. Yeah, it's very easy to get confused, and it's because they are ambiguous. Client also means a browser client. That is not one here. This is a registered client to an authorization server, and once the authorization done, I want the response to be supplied at this URL, and the scope I need is photo and offline access. The state is some random text. This is very important because this state says about the fingerprint of the machine I use. For example, with this URL, if I the response I get should cannot be used on any other machine. This is specific to this machine. So for this request raised from this machine, this is a state. If I use a mobile, even though that's my mobile, for the response, the code, I will tell you that point when I go for next point. That won't work. I will tell what I am talking about. I have a user generated. Okay, it's gone for good. Let's leave it. Um, let's generate again. Okay, so I have a client registered prior to this demo. In the interest of time, I'm not going to reset this because it's just about registering client. So it is registering a new client. For example, you are registering yourself as a new service with Google, and this is your client ID. This is a test user. Consider that like that. I'm going to copy this user here. Then I'm going to use the journey. Now I'm going to authorize here. As you see, thanks for your patience. As you see, this client ID is something but the one which I have just opened for taking the user ID and password. And hence, I have the user with me readily. I'm going to use that. So as soon as I supply my credential, the Okta recognized me eligible user who can access some resource, and it is asking for my consent here. I am approving that. So the consent is based on the scope. Okay. As you see here, it is asking the Okta playground trying to access your photos. Yes. As you recall, in the scopes, we have seen photos and profile, isn't it? So that is why it is saying that profile is default. So photo is something new other than the default. It is telling that the Okta playground requires a photo. So I approved it. What happens is it is sending the code. This is a code here. And again, there is a state. Okay. If I use this in my okay, for before that I have to verify the state. This state is where state verification is where the matching is happening. Your backend will verify the state. If the state is not matching, your backend will have to reject this. As I recall, this is to avoid the cross-site reference attack. So the other than this client, none of other client would be able to access it. I'm saying it's matching. If I use this on any other client, okay, sorry, that matching is done. Okay, let's not confuse much here. So as a result, the state is verified, the code is supplied. What I'm going to do is another endpoints. There are endpoints here. Okay, the token endpoint. We are using the token endpoint and we are posting the endpoint with the details. Again, the client ID, client secret, redirect URI, and then the code. The code is essential to get the final token. So you got the final token here. This is access token. This would have the photo and offline access. As you see, what is this offline access is is what we are discussing about, the auto refresh, isn't it? So as you see, along with the offline access, it is also providing a refresh token. So this can be used further to keep on refreshing the token. That is how the Gmail is always logged in, this kind of offline access. So once you supply, you no need to bother about that. So quickly, before running out of time, we'll cover this OAuth, OpenID. Similarly, similar to OAuth, and we are asking for code, response code, and scope. OpenID. Here you see there is a additional term here, OpenID as well, and state and nonce to keep the call secure. Yeah, and I'm going to use that again quickly. Yeah. Okay, because you see another action, right? Sign in action comparing to the earlier one, because this is a OIDC. That's why we need a sign in action, because this is just a demo application. It considers me signed in and generates a content here. Again, state and code. State is to keep the state particular to this machine, and I'm approving this. This is ideally a backend operation. And then uh, another operation there, the authorization code generated here, we are supplying it for the final access token and ID token. That's what is going to happen here. So we will get access token, also ID token. So these are the, along with the scope. The OpenID just says that this is OpenID operation, and along with that there are further scopes. I need a profile, email, and a photo. That will be granted. That will be granted through the backend code. That won't happen by itself. The OAuth and OIDC job done here, they will supply some text, validated text from authenticated and authorized user, and supply to backend. It is the backend's responsibility to inspect the token. In most of the case, we will use something like APG. You one of might have worked on that APG, which will introspect the token and strip the scope. And when it's validating the scope, it will redirect to the requesting microservice. So microservice and PG already might have the TLS established through MTLS. That's a different concept. So the service will blindly believes, not blindly, with the certificate, it believes that APG, whatever APG sends is an authentic request. So it will serve. So that is how we can separate also. The access token is restricted to a specific user who owns the roles. So when you log in, and that particular user might have the roles assigned, and that roles bring down to the scope level. So permission roles or higher level, they comprise the scopes also. So that way you can restrict. Those are all kind of that should be covered under implementation. So if you implement the OIDC and OAuth 2 properly, so this problem would not happen. So the client is not public client, private client, doesn't matter. So OAuth server will validate if they are registered. If not registered, they won't answer. In most of the case, if you are looking for implementation, that should be a private client, that should be a authorization server which you are dealing with. So this should not be a problem. And I would recommend, before, we need to cover a lot of slide, but I would only recommend one stuff here before we are leaving here. And I'm happy to continue, but if we have to leave, I'll have to leave with this point, because this is very important when it comes to implementing the OIDC. That is called well-known configuration. So that addresses your query. If you browse into well-known configuration of your server, it would provide what it is, or what is the structure, the signature it is using. For example, the issuer is google.com authorization endpoint. This is authorization endpoint, token endpoint. You will never go out of this. If you use for this endpoint, it has to go there. So, and scopes permitted is OpenID, email, profile, all those things. So if you have authorization server your own, you would have a configuration like this. You can easily browse to that configuration using the well-known dot well-known. Um, if you use the dot well-known, you will be able to, if within your authentication server, for example, one of you might have used Keycloak, might have used Auto. If you go there and use in a browser, this well-known, that will, that is capable of bringing in, that's the magic, but that will be bringing in the configuration detail. So along with that well-known configuration, this is steps anyone will go through. If you are starting scratch, which is unlikely, because every one of us working in org, they might have the implementation done. Uh, for understanding, you can straight away go and see what my authorization server. By the way, it is not protected. You, once you authenticated yourself within your server, you can get the configuration. So you can, for fancy, seeing the configuration what it is, and yeah, proceed from there. Otherwise, if you want to do a test for yourself and you want to get started on this, you want to go deep understanding more, you can start choosing the framework which is using which you want to implement this. OAuth provides lots of libraries to do that, and OAuth also a server itself. And within .NET, you, when in a .NET world, everything is .NET. Entra ID, .NET from Microsoft world, you can use that. Then after choosing that, it's all about how you design your scopes. What scope, read, write. It's not straightforward, right? Read, write, like that. So I have a complex thing which is my shopping cart, which for admin I have delete, add or delete items. So it will be like that. So add items, something like that. So you define design the scope to large. Then you will register your API. When your API should have the capability to read the scopes and implement them. And on top of that, you will here register your API means register your client. Your client might have lots of APIs within inside, but you represent as one client. This is a typical scenario for open banking. Open banking is something like anyone can go and register as a client. They will offer service. For example, I have Monzo, and they register as a service in open banking. They could access my HSBC, and they will provide some report. So that is how the registration will happen. Within that, you will definitely need to address the scopes, and then you will implement authentication with the OIDC, and you will choose the authorization flow, which we discussed. Auth code is most used one, and you will create routes, then validate the tokens. That's where I introduced APG, the way of inspecting the token and unpacking the scopes and supplying that to the relevant microservice. You can have either have that kind of route, or you can implement your own. Your code block itself will see the scope and act accordingly based on the budget and your infrastructure. You can take a call, and the rest of the things is all about how you maintain. One important thing is you'll need to store the refresh token securely in a database, so that it would be, it not be hacked to refresh the access token and gain advantage. Yeah, all other details like rate limiting, security is part of when you implement something called APG, you the middleware, they will take care. Those are the stuff. And with that note, I'm closing this, and happy to chat with you. Any of you, don't hesitate and talk to me. Shoot a mail if you have clarifications, or you wanna see or analyze something what you're working on, when you want help on getting started, or you want implementation help. Anything, that's fine. Just shoot a mail. I will be happy to help. With that note, thank you all.